Okay, looks like we are live and the interpretation should be all set for everyone here tonight. Let's go ahead and wait one more minute.
Vamos a esperar un minuto más.
Interpretation again.
Okay, good evening. We're going to go ahead and start our budget committee meeting for May 18th at 6:01. Do we have minutes from last meeting?
No, not yet.
Okay,
They're usually approved at the next meeting.
okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Nikki to go ahead and go over the proposed budget.
Okay, great. I will see if I can get I've better luck this time and I can get my screen to present. And if not, then let's see, present from beginning. Can you see that?
No.
No, we can't.
I don't know why. Down here. Share screen. Do it this way. Share.
There you go.
Okay, and then I can present here. Now is that working?
Yep.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Now I remember what I was doing wrong last time. Okay, and so I can guarantee you we will not be here for a couple hours. There have not been a lot of changes, but there's a few topics here that I've invited some helpers to help the conversation with. So anyway, I will bring them in as we go through the presentation. So here's a few things that we'll be reviewing. A little bit of update on the SSF revenue. District staffing update. You might have heard, some of you might have heard this, some may not. So we're just going to cover it a little bit here. Some conversation around athletic fees and student fees and supplies. Enrollment updates from a couple different things, some information that Greg has, and then there were some specific questions around COA and the demographics of the students that are attending COA. So I have a few slides regarding that. And so Tim Graham is also available for further questions around that, as that's his world. So we can invite him in if there's any specific information you'd like. Okay. So right now, as I talked about before, as a reminder, this budget is built on 9.1 billion. That's the only estimate that I have received from ODE for the 21-22 school year. We do know, however, that the Ways and Means Committee has approved the 9.3 billion, but it's still waiting to be voted on. The 9.3 does require a $200 million transfer from the School Stability Fund. And from the information that I read, it doesn't sound like Governor Brown is pleased with pulling that 200 million over to this, but they sound like they're pretty sure that they can get the 9.3 billion approved. That just hasn't happened yet. So we're still sitting at the 9.1 billion as far as the budget. Along with that, COSA and a lot of our different groups, OASBO, OSBA, are still advocating for the 9.6 billion, because we do know that 9.1 or 9.3 for most school districts means that would be a reduction in staff or a reduction in days. And or a lot of districts are using their ESSER funds just to keep staff. And hoping in the next couple of years that their enrollment will come back up. So just all the schools that I've heard from are having to make adjustments this year. And the last bullet point, just as an estimate, so if we were get up to the 9.3 billion, that would mean about a 1.25 million increase over the biennium. And that is not an estimate that I received. That's from templates that I received to calculate it and looking at our current estimate and what our percentage is of our current estimate. And we run about 1%. Are there any questions on that information?
When will we find out about the 9.3?
I'm not sure when that vote is. Joe, do you know?
I don't know. That's and again, there may be a protracted battle with the governor on this one, so they may have to go back for an override if she decides to veto it. I think there's some question. She has been questioning the legality of being able to pull it out, and so they seem to think they have the process necessary. So at this point, it could be any day, or it could be a couple of weeks from now. We don't really have an idea.
Okay.
Yep.
You know, and sometimes, you know, these decisions even get dragged into the summer, you know, if nobody can make agreements. So we kind of build the budget on what we know, and then we might get more information much later after we have to approve it and pass it and adopt it. So are there any questions on that one?
If we do approve it at 9.1 and it gets changed, do we need to come back as a group to approve the new one?
No, I wouldn't think so, because of the way this budget is built, where we're using up a good portion of our reserves. I think even if we get to the 9.3, I would recommend not adjusting the budget, and that anything that 9.3 brings in over is to build that ending fund balance back up. So I see it more as a savings account if we can get anywhere over the 9.1 at this point.
Nikki, I'm sorry. In my notes, I have from the last meeting that our budget is built on the 9.3. Is that correct?
No, it's actually built at the 9.1. And that's
Okay.
what somebody else had told me too. So we were talking about the 9.1 and the 9.3 that, you know, we're pretty sure it should get there, and there's a lot of push for that and everything. But what is actually in print, and the only thing we have evidence of, is the 9.1 at this point. Are there any other questions on that? Okay. So this screen is just, you've seen this before. I'm just refreshing your memory because I'm going to talk a little bit about the ADM, ADMW, and that information, because that's what drives our revenue. So some of it will be a refresher. But this is the only estimate that we received for the 21-22 school year. And as you can see, On the right, the ADMW on the right column is standing at 5,162 for 2021, and the 21-22 estimate is basically the same number. It's at 5,154. So there's very little difference between those two. And the main piece is just the main difference. The one that causes that is the ADMR, which is the top line that just shows a difference of 4 students. So the 2 years are really similar. So if we bring in any more than that, which we are expecting, I think that our 21-22 enrollment will probably be higher than our 2021, but we'll have to wait and see with that. But this is just a snapshot of the only information we have for the upcoming year from ODE. This is another spreadsheet kind of showing our different benchmarks over time. So I wanted the left column are our final numbers for 1920. So we just received our final reconciliation in May. Our final payment came in on the 15th that takes money for what we owe from 1920 and pulls that out of our final payment for 2021. So for the weighted number, you can see that they show us at 5,621 students. So if you go over 2 columns to the green column, I wanted to show you this because this is what they're estimating our 2021 revenue at, because they're going to hold us harmless for 2021. They're going to pay us at our 1920 rate. So right now the estimates are coming in at 5,621 for our current school year. But if you look at the column just to the left of it for 2021, this is what our numbers really look like, 5,172. Because if you look at the top, our ADMR is at 4,400 versus 4,000, almost 800. And then the different weightings change because a lot of them relate to that top number. So your SPED number is going to fluctuate based on your ADMR and shift with that. So that's where you can see the big difference when they hold you harmless for a year so you can prepare for the next year. But what that means is in 21-22, then we take the hit for that. So then 21-22, if our current rate of 5,172 is higher, we'll be paid at that. If in 21-22 we recover and gain some students, some enrollment back, we will be paid at the actual 21-22 number. And throughout the year, they will adjust our revenue a little bit, but then the final adjustment is a year later, that following May. So we always have to kind of prepare for that we have to cover the school year because the revenue doesn't always catch up until that final reconciliation, almost a year later. So are there any questions on these? I know it's just a bunch of numbers, but just trying to show how that hold harmless works and where we're sitting right now.
I have a question. So it seems like our enrollment has essentially fallen by 10%, but we're not adjusting what we're spending down really at all. From what I can tell, we're actually, when I look at the budget numbers, we're actually increasing what we're spending by about, I think, 7% if you strip out the bond funds. Mm-hmm. So that seems like we're setting ourselves up for disaster down the road if enrollment doesn't rebound. And so would it not be prudent to make some cuts now to head that off?
Well, part of it is, and we've talked about this a couple different meetings when we're talking about the ending fund balance and growing that. These types of situations are exactly why we grow that number. So hopefully, and it's a best guess, and we believe that enrollment will bounce back in a year or two. And as things loosen up around COVID and students are coming back in the building and everything, I think those numbers will increase. I would say that if we get into next year and we don't see much of a rebound and we're surprised by that, we will have to look at making cuts because we will not be able to carry that for 2 years. Then fund balance won't be able to carry it for 2 years. So we'll know real quickly as we get into the year whether we need to be looking forward to some adjustments and or not filling certain positions, you know, as they come open and trying to save money that way to prepare. But we do have the ESSER funds that we have kind of budgeted and spread out over several years as kind of a backup fund if we need to backfill staffing. So we do have all those different pieces that we're also looking at. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. It just seems like we're setting ourselves up for more draconian cuts in the future by not taking some steps now this year.
I have some questions about that too. If we can do this, I'd like to, at some point, I want to look at the budget itself to illustrate something, and I can't do that when you're doing the screen. But my understanding of what, if I read it as correctly, is that we budgeted this year to end up at an ending fund balance of 7.5 million, and we're ending up at 9.9. So as compared to current year spending, if we decide to spend the 9.9 down to 3 point something, we're increasing our spending, not just the 6 million from 9 to 3, but 10 million, or 8 million, because you have to add the 2.4 that we didn't spend from what we're actually spending this year. It's either 6 or 8. That's either 10 or 12% or more like 13%. Real spending increase from this year. Now, I know this year we have no idea really what we would have spent had we had a normal year, and we're trying to have a normal year next year. So I understand that. But it seems to me that rather than give ourselves a 9 or 10 or 13% increase from real spending this year, it might make sense to sort of average that out. Even if we only tried the ending fund balance at 7.5 next year, it seems to me that means we'd have 2.4 million more to spend than we actually spent this year because we saved it up. We put our ending fund balance up to 9.9. That would only be a 4% increase, and that would be, if this were a normal year, that would make more sense. So what I'm saying is I'm in this case, I'm somewhat agreeing with Brian. I'm not quite understanding why we're planning to have what amounts to an 8 or 9 or 13% increase in our spending from current spending next year. This is not even counting the ESS, the extra money from the federal government, which we could be using for one-time costs and so forth. So, I apologize to bring this up at this point. I think the information would have been available for me to do it last meeting, but I didn't work it out until between the two meetings. So I'd like to hear some more about that, where I've made a mistake and where it makes sense to spend it down to our minimum based on the 9.1.
There's my mute. I had to unmute myself. No, I understand your concern, and you know, it is. I know it seems risky, and also that's why we built up that ending fund balance, is to have that backup. You know, we do have capacity if we have to push more over to the ESSER grants as more of a buffer. But what we don't push there then saves that up as kind of a savings plan over those next couple of years. So they're kind of working in tandem between the different funding sources. But, you know, we can certainly probably look at options of what it might look like if we need to look at reducing that number down. But it would mean staff. There's no way around it, because I've already taken out some of the big ticket items and put them over into grants. And so that is also where we haven't posted some positions, because we are kind of waiting for a better picture of enrollment. So there is the potential that we might not fill all of those. And that's why I know the schools are chomping at the bit to get everything posted and everything filled. But we're not quite there yet. We want to get a better sense of what's going on enrollment wise. And the trouble is that we might not know until the fall, to really have a good idea.
Is there any scenario in which our staff costs are going to increase more than 4% from this year?
If they increase more than
Is there
4%,
any scenario in which they would likely increase more than 4% from this year, even keeping everybody?
well, the cost of living alone is 3.5. You put your payroll on top of that, and then your cap increase on top of it. I haven't calculated exactly what that percentage is for this meeting, but I would guess that overall that will be a little bit over 4%.
So my point is that if we, because we spent 2.5 million less than we expected to this year, if we just budgeted what we expected to this year, we would still have a real 4% increase. That would leave us with a 7.5 million, roughly speaking, ending fund balance at the end of this year, in this coming year. If there were, that's too simple. I understand there'd be other wrinkles in it, but I'm really not comfortable. We worked several years to get that up to 9.9 million, and to spend it all in 1 year would be, and then leave ourselves with only 3.7, and that nothing behind that. I guess having been burnt by what happened in 2018 when we had the rift twice because we hadn't had anything, I don't want to get anywhere near that again. And so I'm wondering if it makes sense to sort of have it at least. Not spend it all at once, but spend half of it. And then if we have a 9.3 billion budget, if at the state level, or if our enrollment rebounds more than we expect, and then we're in really great shape. But we're also covered if things don't turn out as we hope they do. If we have the 9.1, and or we don't recover 150 students, or maybe we only recover 50 or something. I just don't. I'm not willing to quite. Last time we did this, I didn't say anything much. I only made a couple of comments when we had a budget that was tight, and then it got tighter, and then it got tighter, and then it got underwater. So it's hard for me to sit and watch us do it again.
But can I jump in real quick? Ron and Brian, I think to an extent, what I'm hearing you say is you'd like to see some scenarios on where we do not deplete our savings as much. Is that correct?
That would certainly be a path. I'm not sure it's the only one, but sure.
I'd like to see that scenario.
Okay, so the scenario that you're describing, I want to make sure I'm clear about this, is either A, you would rather see us use the additional funds that we have in ESSER planned out for the next few years instead of using ending fund, or you'd like to see a staff reduction plan that we start this year. Is that what you're asking me to do?
No, I'm not, because I'm not quite seeing why either one of those is necessary. But what I am asking, I don't think it's my position here to try to tell you which way to do it, but I'm asking us not to spend the whole 6 million extra we have, 6.2 over our minimum in 1 year. It seems to me that we're rolling a little dice there, and we're looking at what might be really, really uncomfortable the following year if we've spent it all. And I'm not quite seeing, as I said, I'm not quite seeing why we have to. When we saved, we actually spent less than we budgeted. So our real spending this year put us at a surplus of 2.5 million rather than a deficit of 6. So it seems to me that's a pretty big swing, which we're planning a deficit of 6 in our current funds. And we had a surplus of 2.4 this year. So why an 8.4 swing in 1 year?
Okay.
Okay. So Joe and I will talk about that and kind of look at some different scenarios or items.
Well, this is just me. This is just me and Brian. We're only 2 votes on this.
No,
so there needs to be more discussion.
I do. I'm hearing you'd like to see where that 8 million swing is? Like, do you want it more outlined? Do you want it?
Sure, I mean, if there's a reason we can point to, though, 8.4 million is the minimum we can do and stay on the same path. If that's our roll-up cost somehow, I guess I need to see that. That would be a remarkable roll-up cost. It would, like I say, our budget is 6, our general fund budget is 6, and if we have an 8.4 million swing, that's a
So is that something, Nikki, that you can?
Okay, so
make?
there is a differential though. So you did look at page, is it 23? It's page 14 in the paper. It's page 23 in the PDF. The one that has the 2021, 2022 budgeted expenses. Is that the one you were talking about for general fund? Because that has our actuals for 18, 19, 19, 20, 2021, and then 21, 22 budgeted and proposed for the last two.
I was muted, sorry. I keep asking for the page number, but nobody could hear me. What was the page number again?
So of the overall document, if you're in the PDF, it's page 23.
Okay.
And it has a number 14 on the bottom right-hand corner of it.
Yeah, I see it. That's where I am.
Is that where you were looking before, where you were pulling up the percentage changes?
That's part of the place, yeah. I'm also going from the ending fund balance numbers on a page which showed the projected ending fund balance in our budget to be 7.5. I think it's the page just above it. And
It is.
that our actual, I know from our budget from our last board meeting, is 9.9. So that we underspent by 2.4 our projection. We have a 2.4 surplus essentially built this year. And the proposed budget would spend the 9.9 down to 3.7, which is 6.2 million. So that means it's basically proposing an $8.6 million spending increase, as far as I understand.
Okay.
Nikki, how much would transportation and how much would sub costs be included? Because that's a major difference between what has been active this year but will be necessary next year.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that is a huge difference. I mean, we have, trying to remember overall, just in subs, there's around $1 million for the year. So this year we haven't spent much of that until these last, right now we're inviting some in, but not very many as far as subs. And our transportation costs have been down a ton. And I think we're underspent with them. I'm going to say probably maybe 900,000 for this year. We're starting to pick up now and we're doing double runs a little bit. And so we're spending a fair amount of that right now. But yeah, so those two are going to be well underspent, along with general supplies and stuff like that. So when those actual numbers come in, they're going to look a lot different than what's actually budgeted.
Additionally, Nikki, will you talk about when we have ending fund balance with our actuals, and then in the page that Ron's referring to on page 13, we actually have a budgeted number and a proposed number, but the actuals are the other numbers that would come in at the end. So they're a little bit different than the proposed number. So there may be some confusion around that.
Correct.
Maybe, except that unless something's changed since the last board meeting, the 9.9 that's showing there as a proposed beginning fund balance for the next year is right on what Nikki was predicting at the last meeting. Actually, it's a few tens of $1,000s less than what Nikki was projecting for the last meeting.
Yeah, as far as estimating and projecting what's going into next year.
So the 9.9 seems a relatively good guess as to where we're going to end at the end of June, even though it's still 6 weeks away.
But you were also referring to the current year where I have 7.5 budget for the 2021 year. But according to the audit, we did end up bringing in more than that. So the actual coming into this year is higher than that.
Okay. Well, that would reduce the 8.2 or whatever it is that we have.
Because we came into this year with 9.4, I'm thinking off the top of my head, I'll have to go back, but we well exceeded that, the 7.5. So in comparing those two numbers, there's not going to be a
So
lot of
some of
difference.
that looks like savings was actually because we had more of a beginning balance, you're saying. And we came
Mhm.
closer to breaking even than this looks like.
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay, well, that would take care of part of it. Then you
right.
would still have the other 6 million to account for.
Mhm. Yeah,
Uh,
and I can break down the cost increases because the bulk of that is just going to be staffing. I mean, the majority of the budget staff is staffing.
Okay,
And if you're looking at 3.5% and $900 per person for insurance for over the year, those are big chunks. And
yeah, and
so,
there's another such chunk in plan for the following, it's already in the contract for the
right.
following year.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that actually puts more pressure on avoiding getting down to 3.75 or 3.9 or whatever the minimum is, because we would eat that up almost immediately in salary increases that we've already contracted.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah,
Hey.
we'll be we have next year's already settled, but yeah, during next year, we'll be negotiating for the following year. So the second year of the biennium. We will know actually when we're negotiating though, what that second year is going to look like as far as revenue.
So
Um,
I'm operating on the assumption that the teachers had a 3-year, did we not have a 3-year deal with them?
3, yep,
And so isn't that going on into the 22, 23 year?
no,
21, 22
No.
is actually 3?
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah.
Hey, Nikki.
Yes,
Sorry, Joe, do you need to go ahead? Or Dr.
no,
Morlock?
no, go ahead.
I think
Uh,
Dave was speaking up too.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dave.
Oh, no problem. You can go first if you want to.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it. So Nikki, I actually would like to request a little more clarity on where we ended last year with the balance, because you said it was a bit more than what we had estimated. And then a clarity on that roughly 6 to 8 million that Ron was talking about. And if you could email that out so that we have a more clear picture, and if that includes what the increase would be with the STEP and COLA for staff, that would be helpful. Thank you.
And actually, the ending fund balance piece is in the slides from last month, so I can pull that pretty easily because that's already in print. But yeah, the other numbers will not be difficult. Yes, because Nancy already has them put together, so it's a matter of just pulling them and
Okay.
presenting. So
And actually, my notes say the ending fund balance was 9.3 million.
yeah, that would be correct. I was thinking 9.4, but 9.3 is probably the
Okay.
correct one.
So my
Mhm.
notes say it was 9.3, and then 2020-21 would be 2.6, and then 21-22 2.7 is what you said last meeting. Is that still accurate?
For the ending fund balance, the 2.6 would be the unallocated, 2.7 would be unallocated. There would still be the appropriate or the unappropriated. So one was, well, for the 21-22 budget, there's the 1,075,000, I believe, on top of that 2.7. So you can look at the contingency piece in the budget for other uses at the end of the general fund. I'm not sure what page that, I'd have to pull that one back up. But you'll see two different numbers. So you'll see the 2% and the 5% as far as the ending fund balance. So that's what brings it up to just under the $4 million number. I think it's about 3.8, something like that, for the 21-22 year.
Thank you.
But I can clarify, I can show those breakdowns and just add that to the email that goes out just for general information.
Hey, Nikki, question.
Uh-huh.
Hey, what's, I know this is a little bit different off the thing, but what's our date that the state, that we give them our enrollment numbers, for what they demand? Is there a drop dead date in there somewhere in August or something?
No, they collect information all year. And so we have a collection that's due October 1st. We have a collection that's due the end of December. And then another one, I believe it's the 1st of March. So all throughout the year, we're doing who are submitting collections of our actual ADM. And so they usually do make adjustments after the December collection. So if you really were trending up or trending down, they try to fix your payment a little bit so you're not so out of whack if there's a huge difference. But yeah, so they collect that all the time. But your final one in June at the end of the school year, they wait for all that and they wait for all the final SPED numbers and everything to come in. And then do that final money reconciliation the following May. So they crunch all the numbers and all the data from the different poverty lines, the SPED numbers, all those pieces, high cost disability, transportation, all those things. And then your reconciliation gets applied the following May. But they do collect ADM all year.
So probably, I mean, never in the history of Oregon, this number could be for different districts, could be more volatile than it would be this year because of COVID. Wouldn't, I mean, is that right? Because we just don't really know what's going to happen.
Well, we don't really know because, I mean, and I'm sure Joe could probably say the same thing. In the meetings that I'm in, we're hearing the same things. You know, a lot of people are taking enrollment hits. Nobody knows exactly what's going to recover. And, you know, if Portland has a huge enrollment hit, they're going to affect the system and our allocations a lot more. You know, even looking at the couple columns here, there's one in gold and one in green. For 2021, if you look at the bottom line, the 8,780 and 8,797, that number has changed and gone down. So every time your student population changes, your per student amount changes as well. So you have all these different numbers that are going to impact that bottom line. So even if we did go up a little bit, if that bottom line number goes down, we're not making any headway. But that's all dependent on everybody else's enrollment in the system as well.
So if Portland went down, that affects us negatively?
If Portland's ADM went down, in theory, the pot would get bigger because there's fewer kids in the system that are dividing up the money.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. But if ours is going down as well or at a higher percentage rate, it just depends where the final percentages fall.
Got it. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Nikki, this is Rebecca.
Uh-huh.
Why would you want to, with the rescue money, you said that we're putting some of it away for savings for the next few years?
Uh-huh.
Why don't we just use that for and not take out of the end of year funding balance?
Well, part of it is that, if we use that, then we are using our safety net up as well. So we just felt like as far as a plan over the next several years, it would be a good place to kind of save it out there, and it's flexible in what we can use it on. So if we find that we need to cover more staffing, we can push more staffing over there. But we always, if we want to maintain and keep up our work towards our curriculum adoptions and renewal and our technology pieces, because we have a ton of Chromebooks that are aging out, so we have to be in a rotation with that and correct that. So it was just the plan that we had. There's lots of different ways we can utilize it. But when we were working with it, we just liked having that little bit of extra savings. So we didn't want to use up those buckets right out of the gate if we didn't have to. So it's just a philosophy and how we chose to look at it this year.
Got it.
I don't know if Joe has a different kind of perception of how he would explain it, but
No, I think I think looking at the longer term rather than the initial bump. And I think that we've tried to figure out how do we use both funding streams as we have necessary, as well as other levers that we have. So, I think it's important to remember that, if you look at, and that's why I took you to that page 14 that was in the thing, or page 23, depending upon what you're looking at, on the general fund, that the increase is really half of what we've increased in the past. So in the past 2 years, it's been about a 10%. This is really about a 5% overall. We have, of course, the sub costs at almost 900,000, almost $1 million in that. We've got a 3.5% COLA for each person that goes up, at least $1 million in savings in the bus. It's really, we saved a lot more this year. So the swing seemed large as only because we actually saved far more this year than we had anticipated, because we just didn't know what to anticipate, frankly, with COVID, and really, half of last year. And so if you think about those large savings, if you look at the ending fund balance is taking a huge swing, the reason it got up so high, frankly, was because we saved money in places that we didn't even know we were going to be able to save. And so I think it's less of an important bellwether to look at. We're trying to look at a smaller increase, as I said before. So we're going up about half as much as we have the prior 2 years, from 18, 19, 19, 20, 19, 20, 20, 21 in the general fund. And then we also look at how do we go long-term strategy to use the ESSER over time in a lighter glide path, so we can use tools like not hiring certain open positions, holding back on some lines. We did that this year, holding out on some that we may not need next year, without going through a big reduction and expansion. And so if we look, if we're trying to do a bunch of that now, we certainly could spend the other ones. We don't feel that it's as prudent to just spend all of those and then be still reliant upon the other ones. They're, because of the flexibility in those, we feel like it's a good plan to have them over a slightly longer period of time. The possible, obviously we went from, for SIA, we went from 30 some percent to 60 some percent, and we're hopeful for a full funding the following year. And so there are just some other things that have come along into play, and that's why when we built this budget this way, we took those things into account, knowing that even building at 9.1, the 9.3 or 9.6 is likely. 9.3 is far more likely than 9.6, but regardless of that, that brings in additional dollars to go toward the ending fund balance and any other things that we don't save. But I think I think just using the ending fund balance as the measurement stick gets you into a little bit of a problem, because we saved in things that we didn't know we would save in. And so that larger expansion, or a quicker expansion at the end as it comes into this year, those are things that were surprises, but they're certainly not things that would happen all the time. So I want to caution people to looking at that specific thing, and understanding that we have put a lot of some caution and some opportunity into this budget to allow us to move forward on it.
I have two quick questions. The first one is on page 23 of the PDF, the other expenditures line that goes up by 2.4 million. What is that comprised of, that 2.4 million increase?
Here, let me pull that up real quick. Hold on just a moment.
And then my second question is, and I agree that this is not the likely scenario, but if we saw no rebound in enrollment, how many positions would we be talking about having to eliminate in order to get our budget to equilibrium where we were no longer eating into our reserves?
Let's take the second one first. Do you mean next year, or the year after, or the year after that?
If we were going to do it in 21, 22, based on those numbers in the gray there. On Nikki's screen.
So the one on the right, so you're saying if we were going by that number?
Yes.
Well, right now, so for the 21, 22, we're using that estimate. And I have bumped it up, assuming we are going to gain about 150 kids. So this would
higher than we currently are.
So I budget a little bit higher than where we currently are because we're assuming that a fair amount of those students will return. Because we looked at a lot of the numbers at the last meeting and showed where we're about 400 students down and what grade level they're at. And so based on that, we're estimating that we would recover at least 150 students coming in. So that's what we built the budget on. It was a little bit higher number than what shows here.
Okay. And based on that slightly higher estimate, how many positions would we be talking about having to eliminate to get to equilibrium?
I'm not sure I can guess that right now. I need to pull the exact number and compare that. I wouldn't want to throw an FTE number out there at this point, but we can certainly put that in the email when we send it out to you, when we look at some dollar amounts.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, loosely as a vague estimate, you can figure a licensed person can average around 145,000. So if you're looking at $4 million or $3 million, that's a lot of staff.
So, Greg did a rough estimate, and I know Greg is now saying, oops. So check the comment section, and that might give you a small guidance. Sorry, Greg, but it was already out there.
Yeah, and I forgot I'm sharing my screen, so as I was trying to pull something up, that probably wasn't real helpful. So I'll try not to do that.
Nikki, question for you. Is this a good time to talk about what the estimates are for enrollment? And have we gotten any numbers back from kindergarten roundup?
We're going to do a lot of enrollment discussion after this. It's part of tonight. And so Greg's going to share a little bit and I'll show our current enrollment information. And yeah, so we'll have some more time for some questions around that. Is there anything more on this screen at this point?
I want to thank everybody for this conversation. It's good. I don't think we've read the will of the budget committee as to what they want to see. We've raised those issues. We've had some conversation. Probably before the meeting's over, it would be good for the budget committee to consider as a committee what they want staff to do. Because it's just been a few of us talking about this so far.
I would like to say that after having lived through my student seeing a decrease in teachers and the slow staffing up that has occurred in the last few years, that we should do everything we can to avoid decreasing staff post-pandemic and during the pandemic. It is very hard on students to have inadequate staffing, large classes, and in fact, combining fourth and fifth graders. That was an experience that my child has also had. So if there's one time to maybe take a break and look at the long haul, so we don't have to have hiring teachers mid-year, also not ideal. I think we need to take a step back and look. I appreciate looking more deeply at where funds were saved and where additional funds are being spent this year. But I would highly caution against getting rid of staff as a snap decision.
Thank you. Are there any more thoughts on this at this time?
I agree with Melissa. I think the uncertainty of returning to school and then cutting staff and having more students show up and then trying to quickly hire staff mid-year, it would just be a catastrophe. But I also agree that it's important for all of us to totally understand these numbers and know where this money is being spent. So I appreciate the extra diligence, Nikki and Joe.
Yeah, that's no problem. We can provide those breakdowns and get them to you tomorrow or Thursday. Won't be a problem. I'll go ahead and move on to the next one here.
I'm sorry, I have one more question. I know
Sure.
you said it would be for Nikki, but
Oh, that's we're here for questions. That's perfect.
at one point you had said everything that could be moved over to the ESSER funds have been moved over to the ESSER funds, except for a few things. Is there still potential to move some of it over to the ESSER fund? Or my understanding there is potential, which would mean we draw down that fund sooner. I understand that. But I'd also like to see how that would play out. Because if our focus really is keeping staff, then we need to see what everything is that we can do. And we do have to look for the future, because I remember 2018 and it was gut wrenching. And I'm with Ron. I don't want to go back there.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And I agree. And that's, so we'll try to do a and it won't be tomorrow or the next day to show you the longer term kind of plan strategy process for that, but we'll get something together so you can see that, because avoiding that obviously is our number one goal. But that's why we've built this longer term plan and made some choices about how long to make the ESSER plan, the ESSER funding last, and how to make other ones kind of eke them out and have a longer glide path, because making a sudden change in staffing is jarring. I don't think that the Newberg schools could handle another one of those without just completely blowing apart. So I think that we'll put together so you can kind of see the general longer term strategy, and we'll try to do it graphically so it makes some sense. Because frankly, there are 75,000 million funds that come in all at once, and they're sort of intertwined and braided, and so sometimes they're not as cleanly lined as possible. But I think we can show you a longer term strategy to allay the fears, because we're doing this in such a way that if we have to reduce, we do it over a long period of time, even if we have even if, as a couple of people have mentioned, if no numbers come back and if our numbers continue to go down, which they very well may, then how do we continue to go through some reductions without having to do some kind of major cuts? So we'll try to do a longer term strategy document for you as well, so you can kind of see that longer part rather than getting stuck in the proposed current, what it looks like over a longer period of time. So we'll put something together to build that out, to maybe show how some of those things could be used strategically.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, just to clarify, I'm not advocating a bunch of layoffs. I'm just trying to understand the scope of the challenge.
Joe and Nikki, thank you for this. Not that my small nonprofit budget compares to a school district budget, but I understand how some funding is tied to certain things, and that there's specific funding that you don't always get, and you want to make it last as long as possible. So really appreciate your hard work around this, because I know that it's challenging.
Thank you, Ines.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got more fun to go. Should we move on? All right. Is this me, Nikki, or you?
Nikki's muted. I don't
Oh,
know.
sorry. I pulled a
All right,
Joe.
there
I
we go.
pulled a Joe. So I'm just recapping. We sent a message out to the community of just some changes of hats for the most part, the district. And a lot of this has to do with what people are currently doing already. And also some additional funding that we're using for like SIA, which that has already come to you, to the board for approval. This coordinator to improve those programs and have somebody directly assigned to oversee them and focus on the dual language, the ELD, federal programs, which would be your title programs and all of those, putting them under one hat. So a lot of this is just to be more efficient and work smarter. So anyways, just recapping that a little bit. This coordinator summer programs, I alluded to this at the last meeting. So there was that grant that ODE put out that gave us a very, very short timeline They have 3 different buckets of what you can spend it on. One of them is for high school recovery, so credit recovery specific. Another part of it is for enrichment activities for K-8. Those are the 2 buckets that we're going to focus on. And we're able to draw up to, it's about 1.2 million. I have another slide later on that has that dollar amount. So we're making plans right now on how to use those funds. I'm not sure we'd get up to the 1.2 because it's right around the corner. They just closed the grant on the 10th and asked a few more questions. They tell us we're approved. We haven't seen in our system to be able to draw it yet, but so we're working very diligently on putting those plans in place right now to provide some activities over the summer and provide some extra support going into the next school year for some extra schooling in August. So I'm sure there'll be more shared with that at the next board meeting. Let's see, I think that's about all with this particular slide.
I had a question on that.
Uh-huh.
I understand that the changing in the district staff did not increase any FTE, and that part of it is from the ESSER fund and the SIA fund. Was there any, in the changing of staff, was there any increase in general budget? So I guess I'm not making myself clear, but often when there is a changing in staff, there's also a changing within step salary that correlates with that. I'd like to know within that no change of FTE if there was a change within that admin budget and if it was an increase.
There would be a little bit. So Karen Pugsley's position before was not year round. This one would technically be a year round, a 260-day versus a principal schedule, which is 230, I believe, off the top of my head. So there's a little bit of difference there. Assistant superintendent, there would be a little bit of salary difference. That has not been negotiated at this point.
Okay, so there no increase in FTE, but it does affect our overall general budget.
Yes, it does.
Nikki,
And we
you know
can,
how much that might change our budget?
what was that?
How much will it affect our budget?
I might have to go back and pull those specifically. Like I said, there's a couple things with both of them. Director of Teaching and Learning, that is a day increase just based on calendar. The other piece of it is we haven't negotiated the MOUs for principals or admin. So I budgeted the same as all the other employees at the 3.5, but none of that has actually been officially negotiated and put into contract. So if there's concern about those positions not being covered in the budget as it is, I have put estimates out there for those. So those are built in at this point. Does that make sense? But I can come up with some numbers on what the pot of money would be as in general for increases in those shifts.
That would be great. Thank you.
Would, for example, a director of teaching and learning have to go from 230 to 270 days? Or could it just stay like a admin's type number and not have to put that extra money in?
Well, it's 260 days. Because the position is tied to an MOU where those positions are all part of the same agreement, you normally don't take one of those positions and make it less days than everybody else in those positions. Yes, probably anything could be done if it was negotiated differently. But then you'd have one position out of everybody else that is on a lesser calendar than everybody else, but expected to do the work of a year-round person.
That'd be roughly, just wild guess, somewhere around $14,000-15,000 more into the general budget then.
I would actually have to pull those numbers. I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
So everybody's on a different step and have different senior or different years of experience and everything across the schedule. Are there any other questions on that one? Okay. Now it's Joe's turn. We're going to talk a little bit about fees and supplies that are in the budget and some ideas that we have.
I want to be clear that I'm unmuted, so just so I'm not pulling at Joe. So as part of building this budget, we also are trying to wrap in some things that have been of interest by this board and by myself and my staff. We've talked through some of the opportunities during these times, as we know families have been either unemployed or underemployed and struggling through. And so a couple of things that we have done in the past. So as a revenue stream, we have charged families athletic fees for athletics and for activities that bring to the general fund about $75,000 per year total. So there are some kids, of course, who get a scholarship who don't have to pay, other ones who have a reduced fee, but the total amount collected is about $75,000 that comes to the district office that then goes back out to pay for coaches and supplies and uniforms and referees and all of those kinds of things. Additionally, in secondary schools, if you are taking some classes, there are some classes that have a required fee. Art would be one that is easy to come off the top of your head. Things that use those other kinds of disposable materials. We have charged students to take those classes while at Newberg High School. That's about a total of $40,000 per year that we collect from students, from families, for them to be able to take certain academic classes. That's also the same for students at middle school at about $12,000. That's what we collect at each middle school. So those fees can be used to pay for the materials and other kinds of things that we do. These classes are not ones that are necessarily required for graduation, because that would be against the law. But these are all the rest of the courses that kids may take if they're taking electives and other things like that. Does not include things that are clubs that are outside and they have their own funding streams. They have their own ways of providing scholarships for students, but things like FFA or Key Club or Ski Team, those things are not what we're talking about today. So the total amount of fees that we generally collect from students and families at secondary for these activities, athletics, and classes is about $139,000. Additionally, we are looking at the opportunity to purchase school supplies in bulk for our elementary school students. We're estimating about $25 per student. The total cost to us would be about $45,000 to purchase school supplies. And I mean things like scissors and glue and paste, which is minty fresh. That's why people eat it. Tissues and other kinds of things that we normally have families run around and get. And it feels like this might be the right year for us to be taking care of some of those things by using our ESSER or CARES Act funding to cover those costs for families for the 21-22 budget. And so this is an idea that I'm going to throw out there, especially in light of the prior conversation that we had. But this is something that has come up many times and seems like something that is prudent for us to move forward with. I know that there have been a lot of discussions about where things are and what things we charge. And, so we'd like to kind of open this up for discussion. We did actually build this into our budget as part of our preparation for this. So are there any questions or comments, concerns, or hopes, wants, feelings?
Joe, you're talking about the 139 or the 45?
I'm talking about the whole shebang. So the 139 is just for secondary, and the 45 is just for elementary. So really, it's 184.
I just know at the secondary level, we totally underfund athletics. We have forever. They don't get enough money. Any coach there that's worth his salt has had to pay money out of their own pocket for uniforms to equipment to everything there. And if we're going to fund it, let's fund it right. If we're going to run this, but if we're going to take all those fees away and say we're going to pay for it, it's been bare bones for a long time. Athletic Director Burke does a good job of juggling 7 balls up in the air at the same time. But I'm not saying this is your fault, Dr. Joe. I'm just saying it's been this way my entire career. We don't give those things enough money, and we really don't. So if we're gonna take this away, and then we can add it back and spend 139,000, then I say we still charge some fees so we have more money in there for things going on at the school, because they're definitely underfunded and it just gets shortchanged all the time.
When you mean underfunded, are you talking about things like balls and rackets and uniforms?
Oh, everything. I mean, every single, like when we talk about, I understand what you're saying with the parents, having to go get all the tissues and all that stuff.
Yeah.
At the grade school, buying it bulk would be great, but I get that part. At the high school level, I'm just saying all the athletics and things. So much happens that gets put back on the coaches. I fundraised the heck out of it for 20 years just to try to do normal stuff that our athletic director and the principals couldn't give us the money for. And we had to ask parents for help, just like you would if you had grade school parents picking up, school supplies. And if we can buy them in bulk, I'm sure we can do way better than like single families. But the high school, we are underfunding, those sports. And I'm not even talking about the coaches' salaries. That's another subject for another day, but I'm just talking about the things they need to get through a season. Tim has to rotate everybody. You get left off the rotation. Things pop up that he has to spend money on that are more important. And so you just get bumped to the next year and you get bumped to the next year. And it's a big drain on a lot of the coaches and the parents. I know for me, the parents had to do exactly what the grade school parents have had to do. So if we're going to take all that money away and then give it back, we're not giving them enough. I don't know if that makes sense, Joe. I was just trying to.
Yeah, I guess that's always hard because it's a little bit nebulous to know what does that mean. Does it mean we don't have enough tennis balls or volleyballs or football physical balls themselves? Does it have to do with we pay for all the referees or umpires, we pay for transportation, we have a rotation schedule for uniforms. Like I think it's always been that way. But what are the additional kinds of things that aren't being purchased? Like a wrestling mat is what, $50,000 to buy a new wrestling mat, but we're not doing that every year, every other year. We're doing that every 10 or 20 years. So I think that's part of the opacity of understanding, what if there are additional needs. We've had essentially zero requests about that. So I don't know, where to take that from here.
Well, Jen Yelm said it, a couple weeks ago. You could see the frustration in her when she talking from the Booster Club.
Right.
The Booster Club under the current leadership has been the best ever in all my time at Newberg, and they've worked so hard to make up for what we as a district don't do. And I guess I'm passionate about this because I've had to be on that side. I've spent money out of my personal checking account to pay for stuff. And I know other coaches have had to too, or certain parents step up and say, we'll just take care of it. I still say that our athletic director, Tim Burke, does the best he can with an underfunded budget. And I think if he had a little bit more there, if we don't want to charge $200, which is a fantastic deal for a young person to play as much sports as they do, then we still should have something in there and still give him the 139. So there's enough money in there for him to do better. And if he can give it back at the end of the year, let him give it back. I'm just saying it's not just balls, and you don't get uniforms every, rotation. All those things come into play because he'll have something happen like just emergencies pop up where something breaks or something happens and it costs $5,000. And so he'll go to the coaches and the coaches say, okay, you're off the rotation. We have to wait another year. And I'm sticking up for this one because I've just been caught in it so many times. But I will go back to $200 compared to what kids are paying for stuff out there in the general world is a steal. And we do have a scholarship program for kids who can't afford it. And I still think $200 is for what they get from any athletic thing or extracurricular activity at Newberg High School is a fantastic deal for that family. And if the family can't pay for it, our athletic director, Tim Burke, always finds a way to get those kids involved. We never turn anybody away.
Oh, has this idea of eliminating these fees been run past Tim, and what's his reaction?
Yep. They think it's a fantastic idea to be able to reduce that and provide more opportunity for kids.
Thank you.
We still should get more money.
Well, and don't teachers spend a ton on supplies for their classrooms every single year, just like coaches do? So every kid needs to go to school, and they get those basic supplies. And I understand the frustration, but I don't think it's just coaches.
Coaches make about $3,000 to $6,000 a year, maybe make that much money. And yeah, teachers do have to go spend that kind of money, but teachers, that's out of their full income. These are just coaching stipends for coaches who are doing this for pennies on the dollar. And if you went through all of our coaches at Newberg High School, they are underfunded, as is some of the other programs that don't have to deal with athletics. So it happens every year, you guys. It really does.
I do have a quick question. Is there any incentives that we give to teachers, schools, athletics, that if they don't end up using their entire budget on supplies and things, that they get some type of, incentive to not use their entire budget? If they use their entire budget and they come back next year and say, I need more, but is there anything that we're giving to them to say, if you find a way to not use it all, that, we're going to reward them for that? I've been at schools where towards the end of the year, there is money left over. We have to spend it because next year we're not going to get that money. I mean,
it's a funny argument because they say that a lot, but we rarely change those dollar amounts for their supply things, at least in the last, in the time that I have been here, when Nikki's been here, we've not made those changes. I think that there's sometimes a knee-jerk reaction to buy up and store as much stuff as you can, because you may end up, because people go after a supply budget to cut. And when you look at the overall budget, the number of dollars saved by not buying a few reams of paper isn't going to save you very much. When you're going into a major, and this, I'm glad you asked the question, Kimberly, actually, this is really good. When you're going into a major budget crisis, some people will go after the easy things. Easy things are like paint and glue and paper and other kinds of supplies that you're using, but you're really only saving a very few dollars. You're not saving very much. You cut one teaching position, you're saving 140,000. That's a lot of paper. It's a lot of glue. It's a lot of staples. And so what we end up seeing is, unfortunately, some hoarding of these materials. And then at some point they're staples from the 1970s. And so I think that there's always a resource scarcity kind of thought of it, but we haven't been decreasing them because they don't spend it. Well, you don't need it. We put it in as a budget number based upon the number of kids you have in your enrollment and say, this is about how many dollars would go in there. And some years you spend it all and some years you don't. We don't have any incentives like a pizza party, or I'm not sure what other kind of incentives there would be, but we do give them a cutoff date because at some point we need to reconcile our budgets for the end of the year. And so we're say, sometime in May, we're like, okay, stop. You don't obviously need to buy other things. There are some things that come in for the next year, like at high school, they'll order all the chemicals for chemistry for the following years. It's got to come in over the summer. They got to have those things done. It's a large expenditure, but the incentive for not spending is that it ends up in the ending fund balance and then gives us an additional resource that we can start our budget with. But yeah, we haven't done any kind of an incentivized program. because there are others who go the other direction and then don't let anybody buy anything. We're not going to buy any paper. And I've actually had that conversation with some people. Well, we can't make any more copies because there's no more paper because we're not spending money on paper because we're going to keep this for something, right? So, but we have not decreased our supply budgets. It's really a low value, low dollar target. It's always an easier one to go after. But like we've talked about last year, we talked about even this year, when we start looking at things like textbooks, when we don't fund those, it puts us not kind of behind. It puts us 10 or 12 or $15 million in the hole on textbooks if we were to try to catch up. That's just not something we can do each year. So, but I think that it's an interesting resource scarcity feeling, because they feel like if they don't spend it all, then we'll cut it back to what they spent to, which we have actually not done in the last 3 budget cycles. And we don't tinker that closely with small numbers like those. So anyway, I don't know if that answers your question. We don't have an incentive program for people to not spend their budgets. We ask them to be careful and cautious and use their money wisely, but we don't cut them back to what they didn't spend.
Speaking of curriculum, does this budget have money for catching up something on curriculum?
Yes, it does. Yep.
So do you
We'll
want me
come
to
back to that one in a
speak
second. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
So
go ahead.
you're
Yep.
asking
Yep.
about the curriculum piece. So 2 pieces. Yes, we do have some in the general fund. It has been reduced down a bit in the general fund because we did push that ticket item over to ESSER. And so, yeah, we have
We're budgeting the same amount, but right.
Yeah.
So I have a question back on the high school athletics in the budget book that was sent out. So what you're talking about are the fees, but in addition to that, there are, it looks like 54,750 from the general fund allocated for the 21-22 budget. So the 75,000 would be, so that the fees that are collected from the kids are not necessarily reflected in the high school athletic budget that's in the budget book. What you're proposing here is extra.
So when fees come in, they come in as a general revenue. They don't directly apply against that. So you'll see the athletic budget actually exceeds the 75,000 that would come in to pay to play or athletic fees. So if we chose not to, so currently the 75 is in our budget. And if we chose not to cover it or charge it, then we would cover those fees or those costs underneath ESSER. So we would be reducing the revenue in the general fund by that amount, and then charging those expenses off to the ESSER fund to make up for it, is how that would work. And then the other place, the different, in a previous district, all the gate fees and all that stuff would come to the district office to supplement as well. That doesn't happen in Newberg. Those go into their individual accounts. So a lot of that is paid, those other expenses are paid through student body funds and through those accounts. So when you look at the general fund, it's not a full picture of what athletics cost. I believe there's about another million or 1.2 million that runs through the student body books, and a large portion of that is athletics and extracurricular activities.
Right. So the only part that we're actually collecting from families is 75,000. If you look at, it's on, well, the PDF's page is 49. The number on the bottom right-hand corner is page 40.
I think it would be a worthwhile use of the SR money to support families who are also digging themselves out of unemployment or extra costs to cover the situation. I think that's a good use of that money.
Yeah,
I agree.
Having 3 kids in elementary at one point and spending, over $200 on school supplies, it definitely occurred to me that this is not a very sustainable situation for most families. And Dave, I hear your concerns, and I always appreciate getting that athletic point of view. And I think that there's a potential for some creativity with our booster club this year. If we do say there's no athletic fees, I think it's right for the booster club to come in and say, okay, parents, you would have paid $200 for your fees, but you're not paying them this year. So let's do a drive and raise those funds for boosters. I think there's some creativity to get those funds continually to schools and students, and maybe even be a boon for the booster club in fundraising for the year. But I think the overall approach of getting rid of these fees that could potentially be difficult for students and families is incredibly important.
I would guess something like that. It may be a reason why Tim isn't so enthusiastic about this, because he can see it as actually amounting to an increase in resources.
Yeah, again, the dollar amounts that we see here in our budget at 724,000 that we put into athletics doesn't account for the other million or so that goes through the gate receipts and things of that nature that pay for all the rest of the things. And so, I think that there's an interesting give and take when we start talking about what programs need, and we've asked for those things, and this is kind of where we land each time. So this was more about supporting families with an opportunity, and looking at it overall, because those costs have gone up, not just in salaries, but we've added supply dollars from 2018-19. We were 34,000, and I've added 20,000 to that as we look forward on some of these things. And same thing with services have gone up. We've added dollars there. So we have increased their budget over time by a fairly significant amount to take care of some of these pinch points that we hear from.
Hey, Joe, when you say it costs $1 million for all of our extracurricular activities and athletics, am I hearing that right?
No. What I'm saying is we put in from the general, we put in 724,000. And then there's all the other things that are monies that are collected. So at gate receipts and things of that nature, those are all things that don't come to us, that we put in towards what our costs are here. So there are other things that those dollars are spent on that we don't have in this book and that don't show up. And so that's a really large amount of money. And I think that, Nikki, what did you say that you estimated the other ASB funding stuff that was coming in?
Right. Through the student body funding, we run between all the clubs and everything, between $1 million and 1.2 million. A good chunk of that is athletics. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly how much that is, but a good portion of it. So between the two, that's where the support comes in. The only money that comes to the general fund to support athletics is the 75,000. So that other portion is completely, there's nothing that comes in to help support that. The transportation for athletics does not get reimbursed. So anything that's, for academics gets reimbursed at 70%. Anything for athletics doesn't. So those are all out of pocket for transportation as well. So yeah, there is a lot of money in total. And I'm not saying it's poorly spent. It's very important to do that. But there's a lot of pieces that don't sit in one place that would give a more clear picture of what those programs cost, because the pieces are everywhere. You're going to have a piece in transportation. You're going to have a piece here. You're going to have a lot of money spent out of the student body funds that is supporting those sports as well and other activities.
Is
Go ahead.
Is there a reason we want to have some sort of means test? Because while I like the idea of this, when we're also talking about potentially having a budget hole that's going to cause us to lay off staff, I like this, but it also seems like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth, where we don't have enough money and we're giving things away.
I think the thought behind this was, when the ESSER funds came out, it was really to support families that have been struggling through the last year and a half. So when that funding came out, it seemed like that this would really be targeting families across the board in these expenses to help support that as the country recovers from a lot of that. And it may be in, 3 years or whatever, when that money runs out, that we'd have to look back and plug something back in, whatever an appropriate fee would be. But this would help support where we are now and where families are right now, I think was the intent with it.
But I mean, not all families are in financial straits, so why would we do this for everybody?
Well, that would be keeping the same system we have now then. So we would just continue on charging fees for everybody, and then people who can't pay it just don't pay it. That's the system we have in place now. What we do know is there are a lot of people who refuse to ask for assistance, and so they don't participate because they don't want to. They're embarrassed by it. It's hard to ask, things like that. So if we want to continue on collecting the fees, then we would just continue collecting those. The 75,000. I have a harder time with our class fees because I don't feel that anybody should have to pay to take a class that is in the offer to the school. So for the class fees, in particular for secondary schools, I think are a larger stretch. If we want to charge people for athletics, if that's something that the budget committee thinks is a better use of the 75,000, then that would be one thing. But I do think we have to work pretty diligently on figuring out how to do elimination of class fees, because those class fees are basically paying for supplies. So if we're adding to a supply budget line, then it would just buy the supplies out of that. Same thing for our elementary students. Those are school supplies. It feels like a subsidy for those things to be brought in. So that was the idea behind using those.
I personally am really happy about this, being that I was a low-income student that had a hard time paying for these fees. It was difficult to pay them then. So with COVID, I can't imagine how families are struggling. So I'm really excited about this opportunity, and hopefully we can make sure that this is approved.
Does anyone have the number of low-income students who are at the high school, or broken down by high, middle, and elementary? It's a pretty high percentage, and so it would probably pay for quite a few students.
Yeah, I don't have those exact numbers. I don't know if Joe had them collected.
I was going to try to pull them up, but
Oh, okay.
But
My
yeah, go ahead.
My memory says our overall district amount for in it's a tough category. It's the economically I can't remember.
Disadvantage.
The economically disadvantaged is around 48% for the entire district, is what my memory is in mind.
Which is slightly different than our free and reduced, because you have to apply for that program. So that's why that number is different.
Yeah. And being a parent of a student who benefited for the reduced school lunch and the free athletics, it was such a gift to me. And it was difficult when I was a working mother, and we made too much for free and reduced lunches, but we still couldn't really afford all the fees. It's hard to ask, and I would like to break down the barriers and provide this for every student. And then those who could afford will donate to Boosters Club or be more freely giving with their money, like Brandy said.
I'm not trying to counter that. I know what you're saying. I grew up, in a poor family also. But I would say that in all my experience coaching, that you don't see a lot of those families with dollars step up. And it's actually amazing when people live a little bit higher standard, aren't very giving. So that doesn't always happen that way. Mm-hmm. I do agree, Rebecca, about the whole thing with, taking that that step to, come in and ask for help for food or the sports. If we're going to do this, then I come back to you, Dr. Joe, is like, let's go back and say, okay, we're going to do this. But I'm just saying, we do have a lot of needs out there that go unmet. It seems like we're spending money in lots of places, athletics and FFA and the musicals and things like this, the band, whatever the kids are into. These are massively important things in their lives. It's what keeps a lot of them in school and gets them through to get better grades and stuff. And I just don't want to underfund this when we're spending these dollars. But a lot of people won't spend. They don't walk up and give. A lot of times, Rebecca, I'd get people that didn't really have that much money would offer to pay for something in sports, and they would be the ones bringing cookies or pizza, when some families you would think could have done that very easily weren't very generous. So you just never know where that's going to come or not come from.
Yeah.
It's a tough one.
Okay, so were there any more questions on this one, or Joe, did you have anything to add on that?
I think we should get to our enrollment updates. Looking at the time, it's almost 7:30.
All right.
Sorry, I can't help but, being the communications person, I can't help but take us back big picture for a minute, because we've gone a lot of different places today. But the story that we're telling with this budget is really amazing to me, especially having had to go through what we've mentioned several times tonight, the 2018 place. We have in this budget, we are presenting a budget with no cuts to staff, no cuts to athletics, some freedom for parents to not have to pay fees that they had done in the past, an ending fund balance that worst case scenario is around $3 million, when back in 2018, we were at $180,000. And we're hoping at that point to maybe at this point be at the 7% that the board had just implemented for the ending fund balance. So we will, even in the worst case scenario with this budget, be better off than we anticipated in the best case scenario of 2018, after a pandemic, after a big loss of income of students. And in addition, we've built in some pieces into this budget that we've never had before in the recent past. We're building in long-term thinking for curriculum. We're building in long-term thinking for technology replacement. We're laying the groundwork and have been laying the groundwork with the work that Nikki and Joe have done over the last several years to keep us on a stable financial footing. And I don't want us to lose the big picture story in this process. As we're going through these really important questions of taking apart a budget and getting all these answers. I agree that it's really important, but I can't help bring us back to that big picture story. So for enrollment updates, what I do want to say is we did a survey for parents to ask them what they were looking at for next year. And we received 1,886 responses out of a current student population of about 4,450. So it's about a 40% response of where we are currently. The other thing that we did with this survey is we sent it out to everybody in our database, and we put it on social media in the hopes that we would get to responses from people who aren't currently enrolled in our system. Now, we have no way of tracking that because we did the survey anonymously, as we do all of our surveys. But the hope is that we are getting not just a picture of what our current students are doing, but also ones who are out in the community and engaging what their response is as they move back. And in that survey, 92.4% said they would choose in-person school starting in the fall. 4.9% chose COA, and 2.7% chose some option outside of the district, which would be Homeline or online charter service process. What was really interesting to me is that 60% of our current COA students chose in person. So for the big increase we saw due to COVID of a lot of families moving to COA, we're seeing a substantial number of those choose in person again, which does make us hopeful for that choice being made across the gamut of people choosing to come in person and also choosing to return to our school. We're still pursuing what options we might offer for other online options that might be able to lower that 2.7% number. We're also going to work really hard to communicate with not just our current students, but with students who are a part of our the land area of our district so that we can get enrollment in. There was a question earlier about kindergarten enrollment, and we just had the roundup on May 6th, and so we don't have hard numbers in place for that yet, but we will keep working on that and get information to you when we have that for how it's looking for kindergarten response. I have more detailed results of the survey up on my screen, so if you have any other specific questions, I can try to answer those as well.
I'm seeing 4 lines of enrollment updates. Is there something else I should be seeing with what numbers you just gave us showing here?
I'm not sure what you're saying, Ron. I ran through.
Yeah,
No, I said I have on my screen a lot of other detail about the survey if you have questions.
Oh, so we're not necessarily supposed to see those at this point. I mean, I'm not supposed to be seeing it. I
Correct. Yes.
Okay, got it.
I was just letting you know I have more information if you have questions.
I do have a question. How many are in COA right now? So what's that 67% of?
That number is approximately 350.
So roughly 200 some of them indicate they would choose to come to in person.
Right.
We do have a couple more slides after this that looks at COA specifically also, so I just thought I'd point that out.
Thank you.
Right. We did a little bit of extrapolation based on how many survey responses we got and how many students are in COA currently. And yeah, it would, yes, it looks like if the projections all hold accurate, it would be 257 of our current COA students would go in person and 113 would remain in COA if the survey results hold all the way through. And the number is actually 385 for our current COA students.
Are there any more questions on this screen?
Greg, if the percentage of 92% of students want to go to online or in-person school, how much, what is that number wise?
It's a little bit tricky to answer, Rebecca. So what we tried to do is extrapolate out based on what Nikki's projections are. So if we gain 150 students, that puts us at a total district population of 4,600 next year. And so percentage-wise, if 92.4% of those choose in person, we're looking at 4,251 in person with 224 in COA. But again, that's a lot of ifs and assumptions, and things could change, but that's kind of the best data we have at this point based on the survey results we have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so went on to the next screen, and we also have, like I mentioned earlier, Tim Graham is available for more detail around the COA program. But this first comparison is from earlier in the year when all students were in the CDL model. So comparing spring of 2020 enrollment at 168 to February of 21, they were up to 526. So they had added about 358 students under COA. Looking at the next slide, this is comparing where we were in spring of 2020 again to where we currently are. So as we had students return to in-person, you can see that number reduced to 264 from the, I believe, the 358. So a good chunk of those students, when in-person is available to them, that's where they move to. But there's still a significant increase over the prior year. So that is where there are a lot of question marks as to what will happen in the fall. How many more of these students will return to the building versus staying in COA, in the COA model here.
Is there a deadline for the students to make that choice so you can know staffing?
I think we are going to put out another survey to have a better idea. It's very difficult for us to put a hard deadline. People always make changes at the end, but hopefully we can get a much better idea.
And what I would add to that is the survey also asked some specific questions for people about what's appealing to them about COA, what's appealing to them about CDL. And so we're in the process right now of gathering staff to plan for, okay, what do we want to offer that's going to be the best way for what our needs that we're hearing from our families. And then the survey that Nikki's talking about will come out when we have it more defined. So we can clearly say to people, here is what COA would look like, and here are the options you would have within it. And that will give parents a better idea of what to expect and give us a better numbers when we ask them what they're looking for.
Okay, I will go on to the next one. And then here is the same calculation, but in reference to our Catalyst students. Again, spring of 2020, there were 211. February of 21, there were 234. So Catalyst numbers did not change that much. And part of that is we didn't really allow that to grow because we were growing so much in the COA area. So you don't see a lot of difference in the number of students in this particular program as compared to the change of the Catalyst program. Were there any questions on these numbers? And does that answer the questions of the previous meeting around students by grade? Okay, we'll go on to the next one. I don't remember. Okay. So here I'm just summarizing just some general impacts throughout the budget. And this would also play into some of the questions that you guys had as far as where those increases landed. So as dual language moved up through the middle school, it requires more FTE to carry that program. So we did budget 2 more FTE in that area. ELD increase as well. I believe that was a 0.5. The next bullet for the insurance cap for every employee, $75 increase. That was already negotiated for both classified and licensed. So that's $900 a year increase per employee. Next bullet, we've talked about this. 3.5% has been built into the budget across the board. Licensed and classified had already negotiated that, so that's a given. Everybody else, that is not completely negotiated at this point. Workers' compensation had a significant increase this year, but it's due to a lot of things, but that is just a cost that we have to absorb. And the last bullet I just put down there because we're still working on, again, that's that summer grant program that happened really quickly. For our next meeting, I'll add a page to the proposed budget that encompasses this, but it would be another state grant at about almost 1.3 million. I don't know that we will spend up to that because we have a short turnaround in putting all those things in place, but we're going to try to. So we'll go ahead and budget it at the full amount, and I'll plug that into a 200 fund where we have to track the state grants. But we'll get that broken out and get those updated pages for our next meeting. Are there any questions on that? Okay. This is just a recap of the budget overall. I'm looking at the significant change from year to year. Of course, the bulk of this change is going to be your 410, where we have the bond proceeds sitting so we can start spending them. And also the 303 fund, which has the new bond debt service in there. Those two numbers are significantly larger. Outside of that, as you look across, general fund revenue is actually down a little bit because we've lost enrollment. The 200 fund is where a lot of those one-time grants are sitting. So we're proposed to spend all of that money, even though we know there's going to be carryover. We in our own spending, we plan to spend that over the next several years, but we'd have capacity here to spend it down a little more than that plan if we need to. So I built it in a way that we would have access to it if needed. Although our plan is to use it over the years to kind of lessen the burden over the next couple of years. The rest of the funds, there are not any real significant changes in that. I guess the one other thing I would explain looking at this. So the 300 fund, that is the debt service that we will be finishing in June of this year, but there'll be a remaining balance there that has been collected over time. So that 550,000 was built into the new bond debt service to pay towards our first payment in this current year. So we don't lose that money, doesn't go back. They just lessen the money that we owe for the first year under the new bond. So that one looks a little bit weird, but that's how that gets spent when you have remaining bond or debt service funding in your budget. I put this in here just because it made me feel better that we have proof that we have the awesome grant coming. So this is what we call a SANS report. And so ODE is telling us, yes, you've checked all the boxes and you have access to the money, which is the $5,026,044. That is built into the bond fund, the 410 fund under the state revenue. That's just the function we put it under, the object we put it under. But anyway, I just received that email, so I threw that in here because I like proof that the money's actually coming, and there it is.
Yeah, but it's dated April 1st.
April 1st of 21.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. They're a little slow at getting the proof.
You're sure it's not an April Fool's joke, right?
I hope not. Well, I found the report online, but I didn't actually see where they let me have access to the money yet. So this is promising, but there's still a step 2 to it. So. And here is just a reminder of our next meeting, which will be next week. Budget committee meeting. So, and then finally, and you usually don't need to come to the budget hearing where we leave it open for public comment at that point. But those are the 2 meetings that are left that are in relation to the budget process. And then questions. So I think somebody mentioned earlier that maybe this would be a good time to be specific on the things you'd like to receive before the next meeting. I do have a few things written down. So one thing was clarity around the ending fund balance, how it went from year to year. Breakdown of what the step increases and the salary increases are. And we do already have that, so we can put that out to you pretty easily. I heard a request of, sorry, my dog. The request of how many positions it would mean if we were to make reductions for whatever amount. So we can break that down a little bit for you. Another item I heard was around the grant funding and how we have that allocated out. I do have a schedule for that, but we can show you what those dollar amounts are. So if we were to spend that all in year 1, what is available through that process. But we do have to keep in mind if we spend that in year 1, we'll be making large reductions in year 2 if we don't figure out a way to spread that out a little bit or spread something else out a little bit. Let's see. I think that's about all, other than some staffing dollar amounts in relation to the changes in positions. So we can look at some of that. Is there anything that I've missed? Okay, so I would just remind you that if anything comes up, any questions, show up at midnight, shoot us an email, shoot me an email. We'll get some information out to you. Or, come and visit and we can talk about the details in the budget if that works better for you. Just give me a call or shoot me an email.
Okay,
It's
anything
back
else?
to you, Kat. Yep.
Anything else for the good of order? All right, we will see you at the next budget meeting. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.